Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf, my name is Kamal, and I am a docent at the museum in Bahishta, and I are colleagues and friends both. Okay, so it is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of Arts of Asia Study Group. So we have quite a few docents, and we welcome the Zoroastrian Association of Houston members. So you make the bulk of the audience. And Bahishta does not need any introduction. And it is my pleasure and privilege both to invite her to make a presentation. As always, it will be wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, Kamal. So good evening, friends. Thank you all so much for being here. And I'd like to do my thank yous before the end because we always tend to forget the thank yous at the end. So I'd like to begin by thanking our very dear Margaret Mims. Please, ladies and gentlemen, our dear docents. Yeah. She and Linda East have been tremendously helpful in putting this together. Also in changing rooms with just a twitch of a nose from American General to Jamail. They did it all. And from Kamal, Mike, and all other docents who are here, thank you. Also, all the members of the Zoroastrian Association. Thank you, Aban and Yasmin, for promoting the program. And I'm really surprised to see so many over here. So, thank you very much. Okay. And I'd like to begin by asking, well, there's always this little verse that comes to my mind. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It shall never fade into nothingness. And I think it was Emerson who said that. But when we think of this thing of beauty, we're actually connecting it with our topic today, Visions of Paradise. So before I go further, I'd like to ask you all, what is your concept of paradise? How do you perceive paradise? So we're going to have a little interactive one-liner with anyone who would like to share their concept of paradise. Can we have some hands up or some people shouting it out or saying it out? Okay.
Place of beauty.
A place of beauty, yes.
Peacefulness where everyone gets along with each other.
Peacefulness where everyone gets along with each other. Okay.
Gardens and lovely weather.
Gardens and lovely weather. Perfectly put. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Sumati, you've been to very many beautiful places.
Oh, from a yogic perspective, I would say Nirvikalpa Samadhi.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
Yeah, the man's point of view, 99 virgins. You've heard of that?
No, we'll have to have a separate session just for that. And anybody else who'd like to make a comment?
Beautiful landscapes, flowing rivers.
Very well said. So we're getting all these thoughts together. How about some people in the back? Okay.
My backyard.
Your backyard. I know you mentioned that in your email, didn't you? Your backyard. How wonderful. I'm in sync with you. I have a very small backyard, but that's my little paradise as well. Okay. Anybody else wishes to share their thought? So putting it all together, paradise is all these concepts put together. Peace, friendship, a garden, beautiful women, and definitely where waters flow. So this topic, Visions of Paradise, was inspired by our exhibition, Gardens of Paradise, which we're going to see shortly. And Gardens of Paradise, in turn, was a source of inspiration for our curator, Ami Fromm. And she actually got her inspiration from this very interesting and very unique carpet, which is known as the Wagner Johar garden carpet from the Burrell collection in Glasgow, Scotland. It is currently in the collection of Mr. Sir William Burrell in Scotland. And when we look at this, what are the things that you perceive in here that kind of connects with this concept of garden paradise? Would anybody like to share some observations on that?
Birds.
You see birds, yes?
Trees.
Trees, birds.
Symmetrical lines.
Symmetrical?
Lines.
Symmetrical lines, very well observed, okay? When you observe those symmetrical lines, what do you think those lines indicate?
Is it the water flowing?
Absolutely. It is the concept of water which divides the earth, or which divides the space into 4 parts, and therefore the name Johar. Bagh is a later Pahlavic name, but initially what these garden paradises were called, or the word paradise itself, is derived from the old Persian phrase Pairi Deiza, which means an enclosed space, a walled space, a beautiful green walled space. And the Greeks adopted the word as paradisios, and the Greek translation of the Bible used this word as the term for Garden of Eden and heaven. So the garden paradise is an embodiment of the sacredness of the natural world to all ancient cultures. So for example, reverence for all of nature is seen through different faiths, different religions. For example, references to natural elements like rivers of life, and in this case you see it being quoted, can be also found in the Vedas. Amongst the Hindus, the 7 sacred rivers play a very vital role in the cleansing of the soul. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is that not the concept that is conveyed? And of course, the beautiful goddess Ganga is responsible for taking care, the mother concept being conveyed through the healing process, the cleansing process. So the spirituality gets pulled in there. Amongst the Jewish holy texts, there is reference to the sacredness of water. Amongst, let's not forget, John the Baptist was responsible for the baptism of Jesus Christ in the River Jordan. And amongst the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, for those of you who may be familiar with Gilgamesh's epic, he goes in search of immortality. And he comes across this river and he goes into the river to see if he can find the immortal one and be immortal. So nevertheless, you see all these references to the holiness of water. Amongst the Zoroastrian faith, water again is shown in the form, its sacredness is seen through prayers. There are actual prayers for water, and there are entities or attributes comparable to angels, if you would. One of them is called Horvatat, which means the caretaker of the water. So you see in all these ancient religions and in modern religions, the reference to water is there. Amongst the Muslims, this demarcation of the river, of waters is there. And again, the sacredness of water as an element which binds or kind of combines this wholeness between the human soul and the earth is prevalent. So the garden, a garden green and filled with water is heaven. It is paradise. And central to the inner vision, gardens speak the language of the soul. So when you mentioned about peace and quietness, that is what it conveys. And it forms a cultural memory that is universal in nature. It prevails amongst all cultures. And here, I'd like to kind of go a step further and mention about the garden paradise sites in present-day Iran. So you can see that there are 9 sites that have been, that according to UNESCO, have their roots. These are the areas where you see very beautiful gardens known as Pairi Deiza or garden paradises, and you will see why in a few minutes, what they would encompass. And we're kind of going to, let's see, I hope this is the light. I'm not sure. Oops, I did something, okay. So I was trying to get the little red light, but it's not there. But you can see that there is a place called Pasargade, just under a little, a little red dot, which says Isfahan. So we're going to start right here in this area known as Pasargade, which is kind of on the left side, one of the left dots. And we go back to the time of the first Iranian Empire, which was the Achaemenid Empire or the Achaemenian Empire. So for the benefit of the docents, I know that we often talk about Islamic arts, but we know very little about what made arts Islamic, and or at least brought them into the realms of Islam. So, and in an effort to help my fellow docents understand this concept, I tried to give a little, I created a handout, and it's for everybody to take, which kind of gives you a little historical overview of where it all began. So the Achaemenid or Achaemenian Empire was established by none other than Cyrus the Great. So here is an image showing Cyrus coming from the family of Medes, and creating an empire that extended from Libya to India, from Greece to Ethiopia. And he ruled around 559 BC to 530 BC. So we're going way back in time. And Cyrus actually created his, he had a stronghold at Pasargade, and he built this beautiful palace complex there. Here you're looking at some columns from the ruins of his palace. Imagine, if you will, these tall, big palatial colonnades, and where Cyrus would be seated with a large audience to be received. And surrounding this colonnade are these, you see this little picture here, which actually shows you just a little, this little channel with a little rectangle there. This was discovered in 1960 by David Stronach, and I'm sure to some of the Zoroastrians you've probably met David Stronach. And he worked with the British Society. They went to Iran to investigate and to kind of go into the archaeological digs. And eventually he mentions that so far they have discovered 3,600 feet of these channels with these little rectangular basins at 50 feet intervals. So what would these channels be useful for? What was their function? Obviously, to irrigate the land, to create beautiful paradise gardens. These will be, so imagine yourselves walking up towards this colonnade with some beautiful avenues of cypress trees, sour cherries, with flowers like tulips and iris, and definitely jasmines and roses growing along. And you would be greeted by the king after that. You kind of walk through this beautiful ambiance before you met the king. So the garden concept, this paradise concept, has been determined by many scholars that it was Cyrus the Great who created this birthplace of garden paradise, or Pairi Dieza. Some of you may even argue that Babylon were probably the first ones to come up with lavish gardens. There's no arguing in that. Nebuchadnezzar's father actually is believed to have begun this concept of lavish gardens as well. And we'll see that in a few minutes. But even if you look at the books in our own library, you will read that the scholars have credited Cyrus for creating the concept of Paradiesa, or paradise. So Cyrus was followed by other Achaemenid rulers, amongst whom Darius I and Xerxes were the more renowned ones. They were, in fact, some of you may have heard the term Persepolis. They were the builders, the Achaemenid rulers in general were the builders of Persepolis, but Darius and Cyrus and Xerxes played a very important role in that. And it is also mentioned that Darius, for example, would actually he personally tended to his garden. He thought it was a kingly duty, a sign of nobility and humbleness to be connected to the world, to the earth. And it is believed that Xerxes, on returning from one of his campaigns, saw this very beautiful tree, and he so fell in love with it that he ordered it to be decorated, and he had guards surrounding it 365 days in the year. So you can see that these passion for maintenance of gardens and trees was prominent amongst the ancient Achaemenid or Iranian emperors of the time. Eventually, the Achaemenid Empire was brought to its, it lost its glory at the hands of Alexander from Macedonia. And Alexander, of course, did not hate the Persians. He envied them. He envied the Iranians, he envied the Achaemenid rulers for the glory, for the sophistication of their empires. And as sophisticated as the Greeks were, he still wanted to learn more about how the Persians were able to maintain a territory which was almost 6 million miles in its, square miles in its space. So eventually, or unfortunately, after Alexander had sacked Iran, he was on his way back and he died young. And he was succeeded. By this time, he had actually put his general Seleucus in areas which we now know as Afghanistan and Central Asian areas. And Seleucus, under Seleucus, you got the Seleucids, who ruled there from 317 BC to about 138 AD. So they ruled for a relatively long time. And they introduced the Greco-Iranian concept of architecture, etc. And for the interest of our docents and also our visitors, we have some beautiful Gandhara collection downstairs. The Gandhara art that we claim is from India, Gandhara really is in present-day Pakistan, with all due respects to my Indian friends. And Gandhara was a very large area. And the Greco-Roman, the Greco-Bactrian faces that you see there, the idealized faces you see there, were the results of the workmanship of the Greeks and the Seleucids who had lived there. So you can see this little Greco-Bactrian combination. And this would be a fascinating, those pieces there are beautiful pieces to use on your tours. Following the Seleucids came the Parthians, one of my favorites. Why? Because the Parthians really created the Silk Road in 2nd century AD officially. And it was during the Silk Road, during the time of the Parthians, that the Silk Road gained momentum in trade, and everything from religions such as Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity made their way along the Silk Road. There were Jews, there were Zoroastrians. Everyone was prevalent there prior to 7th century. The Muslim era began later. And by this time, it was a very sophisticated worldwide trade taking place. But the Parthians are, and of course China, let us not forget China. So during the Han dynasty, the Parthians were there during the time of the Han dynasty. The Sasanians who came later were there during the Tang dynasty. So you see these little connections with China, and China was a big buddy of the great Persian area that was conquered from time to time by different people. So eventually, the Parthians were also responsible for transitioning from the Hellenistic, the Greco-Iranian form of architecture to the Neo-Iranian style of architecture. And they are credited for the creation of the Iwan, the vaulted roof, or the arch. It is my ardent request, dear friends, when you see mosques, when you see beautiful architecture with domed structures, yes, today they can be credited to the rulers of later period after 7th century, to many rulers from different Islamic dynasties. But please do not forget that the inception began with the Parthians in the pre-Islamic era. And therefore, I always maintain that we're looking at arts of the now Islamic lands. So we're trying to give some countenance, some credence to those who were the builders of this arch and architecture. You see this, this comes from a later dynasty after the Sasanians, but I also have a picture here, which I wasn't able to get on the PowerPoint, but this over here, can everybody see this? This is a palace that was built also in the, so the Parthians were succeeded by another dynasty called the Sasanians. And a lot of the artwork that we have in our collection in the small gallery on the left is from the Sasanian period. We tried to get images for them, but we couldn't because they belong to Mr. Hossein Afshari. So no images. But over here, you're looking at the Iwan. You're looking at the construction of a beautiful palace, or the ruins of a beautiful palace called Takht-e Kesra, which was made in a place called Ctesiphon, near the river, a place that was established near the river Tigris, today close to Baghdad, more in the Iraq area. And this was built, this arch concept came down from the Parthian to the later Sasanian dynasty. So the Sasanians continued with the same form of architecture and created beautiful palaces, such as the one that you just saw. Here you see it in ruins. This is at Firozabad, which is in Iran. And here you're looking at a reconstruction of the palace that once was there. Now, it is also at this palace in Ctesiphon that, and this one here is credited to another Sasanian king by the name of Khusro I. And it is believed that Khusro I had this beautiful palace with a beautiful garden paradise. And here, he also, in order to enrich this garden paradise concept, he actually had a carpet created which is legendary in the world today. I tried my best to get a picture. I wasn't able to. But Ami Froome has a volume downstairs in the showcase, and she was debating if she should have kept the page open to Khusro's legendary Bahare Khusro, or Spring of Khusro, or if she should have placed it to show the Wagner carpet. Alas, the Wagner carpet won. And the image of, but she has been kind enough to mention that in her chat label. So the carpet would have been kept in a palace such as this. And when the Arabs conquered Iran in the 7th century, as conquerors, they absolutely fell in love with the place that they saw. These grand arches, these grand palaces, these beautiful carpets, these beautiful gardens were extremely appealing to them. And it also matched the Islamic belief of what they called paradise. So by 7th century, the Islamic rule began to prevail over what was once the Zoroastrian rule of Iran. The Achaemenid rulers, the Parthians, the Sasanians were Zoroastrian by faith. And Zoroastrianism was or Zartushti, Dine Zartushti, or Zartushti faith, because Zoroastrian is a Greek coined term, was the religion that was prevalent for several centuries. And it matched the ideals and the ethical concepts of the religious beliefs. So once the caliphate had been established, the first dynasty to rule were the Buyids around 933 AD. So it took them about 200 years to integrate themselves into the conquered land, to first feel the influence, to adapt, to adopt, and then to aspire to create their own. So it was a process. And you see them that they actually, I've put a little quotation for you all as well. And we say that the Sasanians were the last heirs of Western Asia, and their art, though pure Iranian, penetrated beyond political borders and left its mark on the art of their neighbors, and through them on that of the world at large. And this is from the book Echoes of Paradise. Another very beautiful quotation is, the arts of Persia came to embody the philosophies of Islam in profoundly beautiful ways, and the resulting art included gardens. And therefore, if you were to visit Iran, if you were to visit Turkey, if you were to visit Spain, which was under Muslim rule for several years, you'll see these beautiful, lavish gardens. When the Moors or the Islamic conquerors spread their sway over Spain, they built a beautiful palace with gardens there near Cordoba. And we'll see something else in our later slide related to Spain. And again, just for those of you who want to, just to connect with what is on our text label, the Quran mentions that the paradise the righteous will achieve on the day of judgment is a garden or a series of gardens quartered by rivers flowing with water, milk, honey, and wine. There will be green, green pastures, fountains of running water, fruits, palm trees, and pomegranates. As in most other faiths, Islam also regards water as sacred and purifying. Of water, we fashioned every living thing. So you can see that the garden exemplifies this union between the earthly and the divine, as we mentioned earlier. And again, you can see this concept of Johar Bagh, which goes back to the Achaemenid times, prevailing even in the gardens in today's world. So you see this very beautiful garden of Iram at Shiraz, and all these places, by the way, have some kind of link with the ancient Iran. So for example, places like, and we're going to just kind of, let me just take you forward and go back. Places like Kashan, and you see this place called Bagh-e Fin in Kashan. Even though it was built in the Safavid, the later period, which was around 1500s, 14 to 1700s was when they ruled. It's interesting to read that Bagh-e Fin actually went way back to the time of King Solomon. Some say to the time of the legendary King Jamshid, after whom the concept of Noroz comes about. And of course, it talks about how Darius I, the Achaemenid king, where his father already had the city established, and how there were gardens prevailing there. So you can see how the later rulers were able to continue that trend of creating these garden paradises. So let us go back and take a look at this little aerial view. And I just kind of mentioned about images of Persian garden layout to give you an idea about the vastness of these garden paradises that are central to most of the cities that are there in Iran. You can see a little image up there with channels of water. You can see a little recreation. In fact, Pasargade would have looked like this. You're looking at another Johar Bagh over here, and you can see the quartering with the sacred geometry of the rectangular in the center and the city surrounding it. So going forward, and you can see the same thing over here. But going back to Cyrus and thinking back to what Mr. Stronach discovered, those channels, those 3,600 channels with 50 basins at 50 feet intervals, where did they get their source of water? Here we go, ladies and gentlemen.
Artesian wells.
Yes, this was from a very fantastic, and for those of you who are engineers, you will understand this better than I will. But you can see that they had what is known as the Kanat system of irrigation. And this is, you can actually Google, you'll find this in Iraq and all places, and you can find aerial views such as this. You see these little, they look like groundhog holes up there, and you won't see any groundhogs popping up from there. But you can see how these shafts were burrowed, they were kind of planted in, and these channels were formed at a slope to help the water get distributed and to irrigate the land. Because essentially, Iran is a bare country. And what's interesting is these UNESCO sites of the gardens, that's those 9 UNESCO sites. What is fascinating to note is that each garden that has been created as a state garden in these sites have adhered to the geography of the region in which they were planted. Imagine the engineering skill involved. So this is very important in the creation of these gardens. So here we kind of go down in time, and we come to one of the greatest dynasties that have ruled over Iran, and that is the Safavids. The Safavids came into power around the 1400s, and their rule lasted around 300 years. Mind you, that of Cyrus lasted from 500 BC to 500 AD. The Sasanians ruled there for several hundred years. The Parthians ruled there for several hundred years. The Seleucids for a short time. So you can see so many different people ruling there. But amongst many Muslim dynasties, the Safavids were the ones who, under the patronage of Shah Abbas, created the golden age for Iran in those days. This is the same time period during which we have the Renaissance in Italy. We have the Renaissance in Mughal India. Akbar was ruling at this time. So you can see that the constellations must have really done something, there must have been something fantastic going up there to have created such mighty empires, or at least created such beauty in aesthetics. So here is a little tiled image, and for our docents, we have a beautiful tile painting of Layla and Majnun. So you can kind of connect it with some of these concepts. So you're looking at this, so what would a garden be used for?
Relaxing.
Relaxing. As you mentioned, your backyard, my backyard, right? We want to have tea there. I love to sit and read and do my studying there if I can get time to do that. And also to play with your little one, right? To just sit. Sorry?
Romancing.
Romancing. Don't you forget that. And what Mike said, with all those beautiful bevies, right? So, okay. So, yes.
I get an impression from the figures of a certain Chinese influence.
Absolutely. The Silk Road connection. Absolutely. So you go way back in time to that 2nd century we were talking about, and you see how China and Iran connected, the Parthians and the Chinese connected in a lot of different ways, through their ceramics, through their aesthetics in art, through their music. And you're looking at very Chinese faces, if you will, in very Persianate clothes. And interestingly, Shah Abbas continued the trend. So the figurative element, so if we call it Islamic, figurative elements are not Islamic, right? So this is the secular side of what is known as Islamic art. The orthodox side of Islamic art would be strictly the calligraphy from the Quran, vegetal and geometric designs. That is all that can be rightfully titled as Islamic art. The rest of it, as you have seen so far, has been the influence of other cultures permeating into the Islamic world, or rather, let's say, when the Arabs permeated their fold and started ruling over Iran, they soaked in these cultures, and then they further went and established, they kind of progressed along with it. So, for example, in ceramics, when we go downstairs, we'll see that whereas the Persians and the Chinese preferred colored ceramics, and the Ming dynasty had blue and white, during the Kashan period, which was 12th century onwards, they started creating lusterware using metallic oxides. That was purely their creation. So it doesn't mean we have to discredit what they did. And my whole point is, let us not discredit those who brought these inceptions forward for the Islamic lands. Okay. So you're looking at this very beautiful picnic taking place here. Don't miss all those little wine containers. You'll see some of them downstairs in the Hossein Afshari collection. And the beautiful cherry blossom tree that is on the side with the cypress in the back, the fruits, and just to create an ambience, we've got fruits and pistachios for you all. And over here, you can see this, I just took the tile panel and compared it with something in Japan, the cherry blossom tree from Japan. Here's another one for your viewing pleasure, because now we're going to see visions of paradise, which are kind of global in nature. So you're looking at this very beautiful Japanese garden. Even in China, those of you who have visited the Forbidden City and the Summer Palace of the Chinese rulers, you cannot help but connect it to the Pairi Deiza concept. Because you see these green walls, literally, and you walk and meander amongst these beautiful rocks and plants. You cannot help, these are all segmented. So the concept continued in so many different ways. Not that the Chinese didn't have their own, but they just integrated these different concepts as well, just as we may have integrated some of theirs. So there's always a give and take there. You're looking at one of my favorite artists, and I'm sure some of our docents here will agree, our great Thomas Cole, who spoke about the manifest destiny of man, right? He spoke about, come to America. This is the country that one needs to live in. And look what he's projecting here, the Garden of Eden. So this is, I just thought that we would have fun looking at some of these beautiful global visions of paradise. Here we're looking at something very Roman, and I could have chosen another picture, but this one actually gives you that concept of colonnades and trees lined up, and the water, and this geometric rectangular space, which again reflects the Pairi Deiza concept. Here we're looking at the mythical, magical, legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon. And we know that it is believed that the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were built during the time of Nebuchadnezzar. And so here is a little heritage site, and here you see an image of what it could have been like. Of course, some scholars totally refute the existence of the Hanging Gardens. But somehow, with all the evidences they have, they're now able to, actually there is a program that comes on TV called Mysteries at the Museum. And currently, there was a little conversation there that mentioned that the Hanging Gardens were not in Babylon, but in Assyria. So you can see how times change, how thoughts change, just as much as they've been able to actually think that they're able to get some Mayan influence in Georgia. So you can see how fascinating these discoveries are becoming, right? With modern methods and technology. And of course, it is believed that the Archimedean screw principle is what led the water to be channeled upwards. But again, that concept of irrigation comes down from the time of the Medes into the Achaemenian, into the Babylonian concept. Because who ruled over Babylonia or Babylon? Good old Cyrus. When the Cyrus cylinder was here, that was evident that Cyrus was actually invited by Nebuchadnezzar, right? Because that was not Nebuchadnezzar, but Nabonidus. To come, or they were trying to get rid of Nabonidus, so the Babylonians invited Cyrus to come and help them. And Cyrus gave the Jews back their money and the permission to rebuild their temples, and today he is revered by the Jews. It is also believed that a Median princess craved for palaces that she missed in Babylon. So her husband created these gardens based on the Median concept. And the Medes, as we mentioned, go back even before Cyrus established his empire, because he was of the Median descendant. So again, you're seeing this little chain coming down in succession. Right here, we're looking at the garden at Versailles. You can see the Johar Bagh concept, the crisscrossing. And I do want to mention, though, that we mentioned that amongst the Islamic philosophy, the Johar Bagh represented the quartering of the river, representing water, milk, honey, and wine. But amongst the Zoroastrians, there was another thought. It was the quartering of land, air, water, fire. So you can see why Cyrus may have had some ethical concept or some religious belief or some spiritual philosophy behind the quartering of the garden concept. And of course, we're looking at the most beautiful Alhambra. Anybody been to Alhambra? Right. Isn't it paradise in itself? And we took beautiful pictures and beautiful pictures. When I went there last summer, you couldn't see the green. It was flooded with roses. Imagine the paradise that I saw there and once at Regent's Park in England. And we took so many pictures that I would have loved to have shared had my camera not got lost. But you can see these beautiful flowing waters, etc. And you can see the Iwan right there, the colonnades and the Iwan. So right there in Alhambra, one of the most beautiful paradises in the world. And we cannot at any point negate the beauty of the Taj Mahal. Now, I had a slightly shorter version written in my text, but Margaret was kind enough to elaborate a little bit more on it in your text. So Taj Mahal, of course, so we kind of, I do want to mention that there was a lull when the Mongols invaded Persia, and the Mongol invasion was a great blow to the Iranian aesthetics in art and architecture under Genghis Khan. But under Temur or Tamerlane, it kind of rebuilt, Tamerlane kind of had this fervor for things which were beautiful. And Tamerlane actually ruled, he was a great ruler in his own right. He conquered Iran, parts of India, Russia, Samarkand, Tabriz, Damascus, Aleppo, Delhi. So he had these palaces and gardens built according to the Persian influence in all these places that he held sway over. And then, of course, coming down the line comes good old Babur. And in Baburnama, he actually speaks about his longing for the watermelons and the roses of Kabul, which was once a territory belonging to the Parthians. And of course, later on it was Mongol, his ancestors were Mongols. But that beauty continued to exist in all these lushness of plants, flora and fauna. And down the line, he was an ardent lover of art and architecture, so he continued on the same lines as his ancestors had. And eventually, we have one of the greatest and the most prolific builders of the time, who was Shah Jahan. Which does not mean that when the Mughals were ruling in India, they didn't just imbibe the Persian architecture, which you do see in a lot of their buildings, but they also integrated Indo-Iranian architecture. So there was a lot of integration. In fact, Akbar married into Rajput families. So the Indian influence was as much rampant amongst the Mughals as was the Persian influence, and therefore the Indo-Iranian merging of art and architecture. So here you see this beautiful concept of the waters, the building itself, the dome structure with the Ivan, the tree-lined avenues. Absolutely beautiful, except if you go there in summer, and if you have to walk barefoot, it'll burn the sole of your feet. So we go to another very beautiful garden in England, in Kent. You can still see the Johar Bagh concept. And we now turn our attention to a little overview of the carpets themselves. How were these, what is the origins of the Persian carpet? And I'm kind of just giving a little synopsis of that. So right here, and in your handout, I've mentioned that the creation of carpets dates back to 2,500 years. And its origins were from very simple and humble beginnings. They were used as floors, things to sit on the floor, or for coverings on the walls to keep their homes comfortable. But they made their way to the kingly courts. And it was a much guarded secret, passing down from father to son. And as per the Iranian Chamber of Commerce, they say, to trace the history of Persian carpet is to follow a path of cultural growth of one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever seen. And one of the carpets that is known worldwide is the Bissell Carpet from the 4th century BC, which is currently in the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, Russia. And it's only about 6 square feet in its area. But it was found in the tomb of some Scythian chiefs, and it is very Achaemenian in its motifs. You can see the reliefs of the figures in Persepolis, which was the palace built by the Achaemenids, and you can see the same pattern being repeated in the border in the Bissell Carpet. Further investigation also showed that they used the Persian knot from the Achaemenid period. So you can see that the technique varied from time to time. And why I mention this is because as we go down the line, you can see that there are several techniques employed in the creation of, in the weaving of a carpet. Our Wagner carpet is created by what is known as the vase technique. And in the vase technique, and some of you may have seen how carpet weaving takes place, you've got the warps that go from up to down and wefts that go from left to right. And over here, an ordinary carpet would have one warp, one weft interwoven with the warp. So the weft interweaves with the warp. But in this case, you've got 3 threads, and 3 threads are from wool, cotton, and silk. And those are interwoven with 1 warp loop. It's looped. So 3 threads to 1 loop. So it's kind of a different technique. And that's what makes our Wagner carpet downstairs so unique. It's done by, there are only 3 carpets as valuable from the Safavid period as the one that is downstairs. And it is very rare to see such a carpet. It's out of its home only for the 3rd time, and we're lucky to have it. So you can see that there's also what is known as the vase design, which kind of makes its way from this beautiful vase. I don't like to use the word vase, but if you may call it vase if you wish to. But you can see a vase making its way up. And it's not the typical symmetrical carpet with the 4 corners being symmetrical, or the niche, which would be a prayer rug. This is a different kind of carpet. And there are some more examples of that over here. You see the beauty of these carpets. Even today, Iran is well known for creating these beautiful carpets. But along the line came the Seljuks, who were of Turkish origins. And they created their own Turkish knot. And the Turkish carpet started gaining momentum. Turkish carpets were mainly made by women. And this is how they started, eventually got famous. So we see all these beautiful motifs on the carpet. We talked about the garden paradise. We just briefly mentioned. I wish we could have what is known as smell-o-vision over here, and you could have, enjoyed the fragrance of these beautiful flowers. The rose, the damask rose, had its origins here. The hyacinth, the tulip, which all along till the 1990s I thought was so strictly Dutch, ended up being of Central Asian origin. is the curator of the Afghanistan exhibition, Friedrich Hebert from National Geographic, who drew our attention to it, and I was so pleasantly surprised. You see the cypress tree, you see the beautiful iris, and you're going to see a lovely painting of it downstairs, signifying love, responsibility, spirituality, etc. And of course the beautiful cherry blossoms that we saw earlier. Not to forget sour cherries, apples, at some point grapes, oranges, no. Oranges were not there at that time. So you can see that it just kind of, it's refreshing to see these beautiful plants here. And the fauna. So you're also looking at these beautiful, the reason why I chose these images, can anybody suggest why I could have chosen these images? Some of the docents?
Well, you got a nightingale there, I believe.
Yes,
Nightingale.
the bulbul.
The nightingale and the rose.
Yes, the Gule Bulbul, because the Safavids were Shiites and they descended from the Sufi faith. And one of their beliefs is the story relating to Gul, which is rose, and the nightingale, which is Bulbul. And it is, for them, it is a very spiritual concept where the nightingale keeps singing even though the thorns of the rose hurts it. But it's the lover's longing for God, no matter what adversities he has to go through. So that is the real meaning for it. So I put in, and I even have a little bird on the table, if some of you notice, just to create that little bulbul. I don't think it's a bulbul, but nevertheless. And then, of course, we see the fish. Please make a note of these, because we'll play a little Where's Waldo when we're downstairs, where you can identify the fish in the carpet and in the other artifacts from Mr. Hussain Afshari's collection. You'll find ducks in our carpet and in the artifacts. Deer, lions, tiger. What were they doing on carpets and in these garden paradises? Well, ladies and gentlemen, these kings enjoyed hunting. And they had deer parks. So you can see that the inclusion of these images relates to the king's choice of revelry. And finally, I'd like to end by stating, and Kamal and Sumati are going to pass out little roses dabbed in rose water. But first, I'd love to share this with you with Rumi, one of the famous poets, Sufi poets. When the rose is withered and the garden is gone, you will hear no longer the nightingale's song. When the rose is withered and the garden laid bare, in attar of roses, the scent is still there. So, ladies and gentlemen, may the fragrance of the little roses remind you of the visions of paradise. And I go back to what Emerson said, a thing of beauty is a joy forever. So, having said that, you might also want to have a little taste of Turkish delights, which we have in the back. So once you, and if there are any questions that you might have, any statements, any suggestions, please feel free to address them. Yeah. Anybody? Yeah. So.
No questions.
No questions?
Perhaps the next session you can see the influence of Persian gardens onto the rest of the Western world. You could do a session on that. That would be really interesting too.
Accession, which part of the, because we mentioned Rome, England,
yes,
Spain.
More in depth.
More in depth.
More in depth.
More in depth, yes. Okay. I had to connect this with our garden paradise, exhibition.
Yeah.
And also to tie the history to see where we're heading. So we had to do that. But yes, we could do that. Okay. So, sorry? What is the meaning of attar? Attar is the rose water, the rose fragrance, the perfume. Okay. That's what it is. So attar, for those of you who may want to know what it is the rose essence, the perfume, the rose perfume. So that's what it means. Yeah.
Have you dabbed this in Uptown?
I dabbed it in rose water. So I just sprinkled rose water over some paper towel and doused it with flowers in between, so you could take it home as a little fragrance. Yeah. Essence, yes. It's the essence. Yeah. So any other thoughts to share? Anything else? No, I just got these. And so my fellow docents, we've also got handouts with images relating to different, we tried to kind of, thanks to Linda East and Margaret, we were able to get images as a handout for you all to take, where I've kind of, and I wish I could have connected it more with our European collection, because we have a lot more in the European collection also, where we can tie in the concept of Ivan and architecture, the concept of carpets, etc., amongst the 18th century paintings and also the early Renaissance works. But what I was able to access were what we could get off from our website, those, the museum website. So I put in things like ceramic items, something in metal. One thing that I highly recommend are the beautiful, there are 5 ewers from the Sasanian period from Mr. Hossein Afshari's collection, which are downstairs in the left gallery from Arts of the Islamic Lands. And there are 5 new ones. I put in an image of a blue glass bottle, because even though we know that blown glass was something that was given to us by the Romans, but molded glass was there not just in Assyria and Lebanon and places such as that, but also in the Achaemenid times. The blue faience or faience that we see in the Egyptian was also there in the Near East. You saw that, in that little image for Babylon as well. So I've tried to tie in, and then we talked about the Gandhara images. Sumati, can you mention some of the other images that are there?
Something comes to my mind right off
Yeah.
the bat.
Do you have the copy of images? Because I don't have.
Put my glasses inside.
No problem. So, and please feel free, even those who are, the visitors. We've got a tile piece over here for Layla and Majnu. We also have a beautiful embroidered piece of Layla and Majnu. And if you recall, I'd actually done a little peer-to-peer session on that. We have the tent cover from the Mughal period with the Ivan and the flowers growing there. We have folios from the Shahnameh downstairs, which is very traditionally, as we all know by now, very Persian, written by Ferdowsi, or composed by Ferdowsi, and then the illustrations were created, were kind of, they were commissioned by Shah Abbas's father and later by Shah Abbas. So the images came about later, and the story was, but the stories were all written about the emperors prior to 7th century. So they come all the way from our legendary kings, from Gayomard down to Yezdegerd. So you can see that even Ferdowsi, a poet, basked in the glory of the past. And King Shah Abbas and the other Safavid rulers were able to take it a step further through illustrations. And Surya, the North Indian, the god Surya, the sun god, he wears Parthian boots. So that is a beautiful Indo-Parthian connection that I mentioned earlier. So you have that there. And of course, we spoke about the Gandhara pieces. We have a very beautiful painting from the Qajar period that ruled over Iran for some time. So there is a new painting in one of the galleries with the dancing lady. So she's the one with the bushy eyebrows. The Qajars were famous for bushy eyebrows as being fashionable. So these are some of the, and of course the incense burner, which is very, very, the feline image goes way back into time. And these little ceramic ewers gives the influence of the East meets West, meaning the China-Parthian connection, or later on the China-Iran connection along the Silk Road. So these are just some of the images. There are many more. The chainmail was again a product that was created in the Achaemenid times, and later the Sasanians wore it, and then you can see it in the chainmail with the Turkish people, and then of course the medieval knights. So even chainmail, something was there. The mirrors that you see that in the Greek area were also, the bronze was brought in from China. Some of them were designed along the Silk Road in the Parthian areas, and then they were traded to different places. So there is so much that went out to the Western world. Stringed instruments, the guitar is the ancestor of the lute, and the lute is the great granddaddy of these musical stringed instruments. You can go back to Armenia, you can go back to Jerusalem, you can go back to Iran and see how rud or ud, these wooden instruments, stringed instruments, were already prevalent over there. So the list goes on and on and on. But please feel free if you have anything to share. But now we'd like to offer you some Turkish delights. So we've got some napkins and some little sweets that will leave a sweet flavor.
Can I just have a moment?
Yes, of course. Please do. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Now we know why you've gone to greater heights with this. Huh?
Oh my God. Let me just.
Vajda, on behalf of all of the Zoroastrians, you have opened a window and always inform us of new visitors. And I have to thank Margaret Mims too, because she's been so receptive, and you have had a channel for us. And we've had such a good association over the years. So thank you very much. The Museum of Fine Arts in Houston is a real treasure. It can be a hidden treasure, but over the years we've seen it grow and encompass, and this is a little thing for you to offer. Thank you very much. Okay.
You shouldn't do This was not necessary. Just your presence here is enough. And I thought only about 4 or 5 people would turn up, but I was so pleasantly surprised to see that so many of you turned up. So from what? 2 docents who had signed up, Mike? Thank you, Mike, for your efforts as well.
Weather cooperated with time. If it was raining, we would show. The stars were in your favor.
The weather cooperated, you're right. But the time didn't, because I had a lot of docents request me today to do it again for them, because the time didn't go in their favor. So hopefully we'll keep it maybe at an afternoon time when more docents could join us. But please share this information with others, because it's okay to say Islamic arts, but what really is Islamic art? Where do we draw the line, or how do we extend it beyond Islam? And this is my ongoing conversation with the curators. Please go a step beyond and inform the docents, inform the visitors that what they perceive as arts of the Islamic land had its inception in the lands prior to 7th century. It didn't just exist in vacuum or just come about suddenly. All these places contributed, particularly in context with Islam. It was Iran, because that is the place they conquered. And that is the place when, and I don't want to get into the politics of it, but that's where they conquered, they came, they stayed, they conquered. And Zoroastrianism at some point was almost obliterated, were it not for the few devotees who made their way out to India, China, and other places of the world. So we continue to exist as a 0.what%. So we're still a living faith, but at the same time, as we mentioned in the Achaemenid statement, the contribution they left behind is tremendous. So, and I hope the Zoroastrian community takes this word beyond and spreads it with motivation to their families and the younger generation, because they need to awaken to this. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. All right. So we'll go downstairs. Please do take a little treat. we've got some, as I said, little sweets for you all. And we'll go down for a little tour of the exhibition. Okay. Sorry.
I'll give that one. That's mine. You're welcome. Sorry, I put my glasses away and I couldn't see. Thank you. It's a little tiny.
Thank you. And beautiful. Thank you for the AV. Thomas, thank you so much. Yeah.